There's a big campaign going on now to reduce the stigma of mental illness. And I know that the people who are doing it are really sincere about it. And I think it's important. I think it's important to reduce the stigma of mental illness. Let me tell you why I do this with mental illness. Mental illnesses are certainly illnesses. I know I've suffered from them. Um, and they're illnesses in the sense that they impair functioning. When you're suffering from a mental illness, you're going to have a very hard time loving the way you want to love, working the way you want to work, enjoying life the way you want to enjoy life. So it's an illness. But mental illnesses are much more than illnesses. They're also wake-up calls, they're growth opportunities, they're signals that something's wrong. Uh, so just to call them an illness is to really misrepresent them. So here's my concern about this campaign to reduce the stigma of mental illness. Uh, it's not going to work very well, and the reason for that is that the thinking behind the campaign, the strategy, is to convince people that mental illnesses are essentially physiological in nature, that they're caused by chemical imbalances, by brain disorders, by genetic anomalies, that they're like diabetes or they're like cancer. They're just, physiological diseases. Um, the problem with that is that there's some research that says that if people believe that mental illnesses are physiological in nature, they tend to look upon people suffering from mental illness with a more negative aspect. They tend to see them as broken. There was some interesting research done. The researchers had subjects. They described subjects. They described people who were mentally ill to these people, and then they asked them to fill out a questionnaire indicating their attitude toward these people. And it turned out that when you described a person suffering from a mental illness in a way that indicated that this is a physiological disease, it's just a brain disorder, genetic anomaly, chemical imbalance, people were more likely to look down on that person or to consider that person broken than they were if you said that, basically this is a person who's suffered some very difficult trauma or has been through some very difficult experiences, is having a hard time coping with his or her life, right? So if mental illnesses aren't caused by physiological factors like chemical imbalances, etc., what are they caused by? What are they? Well, here's what they are. They're reactions to people's lives. They are reactions to life situations, to concerns that people have about themselves and their lives. That's what they are. That's what they are, fundamentally. Of course, they involve biochemistry, they involve genetics, they involve the brain. But if you want to understand what mental illnesses are, you have to understand that they are essentially how people are reacting to their lives. It's how people are trying to cope, trying to avoid pain, protect themselves, feel more adequate, feel more powerful, gaining the illusion of control. Mental illnesses are essentially emotional distress, life crises, difficult dilemmas, spiritual emergencies, all kinds of overwhelm. They're all about people's lives and how they're reacting to their lives. To see them as, some kind of physiological disease is just to make a big mistake. So why do these people who are running this campaign think that if they convince people that mental illnesses are physiological in nature, why do they think that's going to reduce stigma? Well, I think they feel that way because they think, well, if these are physiological illnesses, then people aren't to blame for them, right? There's this crazy idea that if you have control over your state of being, if you can do something about it, that means you're to blame for it. right? Now, one of the most cynical things about this belief that mental illnesses are caused by physiological factors is it essentially, well, it means that if you believe that, you believe that you don't have any control over the most important thing in your life, your mind, your state of being, your state of mental being, your ability to think, to experience emotions, to decide what you want to do and do it, to intend, to perceive. You're believing that you don't have any control over that. That that's just a matter of genetics, biochemistry, and brain function. That's a pretty cynical belief. So here's my take on this. Why would you blame anybody for their state of being? That doesn't make any sense to me. Why would I do that? Nobody chooses his or her parents, right? And your parents have tremendous influence over your life. What happens to you in the first 15 to 18 years of your life is going to have a tremendous impact on your behavior later in life. So since nobody chooses their parents and nobody chooses their early experience, how can we blame them for anything? It doesn't make any sense. Of course, people are responsible for their state of being and for their health, but to blame them, we have to take blame out of the vocabulary. It doesn't make any sense. Um, so, uh, I say if a person, let's say, is suffering from some kind of mental depression, bipolar disorder, anxieties, even schizophrenia, right? Well, uh, you know, what they're doing is reacting to their life and trying to live the best they can, trying to survive. And the fact that they're experiencing this state of being is essentially a function of what's happened to them in their lives. Obviously, some people are much more able to cope with things, to deal with problems than other people, to deal with stress, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, people are born with different temperaments. There are people who were born wired, people who are born laid back. So it does make a difference, what your temperament is. But basically, it doesn't make any sense to blame anybody for the state of being in which they're in which they're living, or which they're experiencing or wrestling with. So this is why this anti-stigma campaign is not likely to work very well, because the message they're sending out is, these are physiological diseases, and when they send that message out, people see people as being really broken.